The temperature outside is -40 degrees. The wind is moving at 30 miles per hour. There is no furnace. There is no thermostat. There is no insulation rated R30 packed between factory-cut studs. There is only a log cabin, a single fire, and a man who built that cabin with his own hands in the middle of nowhere. And he is not cold. That is the part nobody talks about. The frontier cabin was not a desperate freezing box that people barely survived in. Built correctly, using methods that took generations to develop, a frontier cabin could hold heat through a night that would kill a modern camper in hours. The techniques were precise, they were intentional, and almost every single one of them has been forgotten. Not because they stopped working, because the people who perfected them stopped being listened to. His name was rarely recorded. He was a trapper, a homesteader, a mountain man who spent decades above the tree line and never once described himself as tough. Toughness was not the word he would have used. Prepared was the word. Because the men and women who survived those winters did not do it by enduring the cold. They did it by understanding it. Cold, to a frontier builder, was not an enemy to be fought. It was a physics problem to be solved. And the solution started long before the first log was cut. The site selection alone was a science. Frontier builders understood something that modern construction largely ignores. The land itself is a thermal system. A cabin placed on the south-facing slope of a hill received more direct winter sun than one placed in a flat clearing. A cabin tucked into the lee side of a ridgeline was shielded from the prevailing wind by the ridge itself, cutting the effective wind chill dramatically before a single wall was raised. A cabin placed near a dense stand of evergreens on the north and northwest sides used the trees as a windbreak that cost nothing and required no maintenance. Researcher and vernacular architecture historian Howard White Marshall spent years documenting these siding patterns in frontier structures across the American Midwest and Appalachians. What he found was that the placement of these buildings was not random. It reflected a deep, accumulated knowledge of local wind patterns, solar angles, and thermal mass behavior that the builders had either inherited from generations before them or developed through hard, costly trial and error. The cabin's orientation mattered down to the degree. The door almost always faced south or southeast. Not because of tradition, because a south-facing door caught the maximum amount of low winter sun during the hours when the fire had burned lowest, in the morning, and minimize the amount of north wind that hit the door's cold gaps when the temperature was at its worst. The gaps. That is where the real science began. A log cabin is not a sealed box. It never was. The logs themselves, no matter how carefully cut, are round on two sides and flat on none. Where one log rests on the next, there is a gap, and a gap in a wall at -40 degrees is not a minor inconvenience. It is a channel for cold air moving at high velocity directly into the living space. Every BTU the fire produced could flow out through those gaps just as fast as it flowed in. The chinking was the answer, and not the simple mud and grass patch that most people imagine when they hear the word. Frontier builders developed chinking compounds that were sophisticated by any standard. The base material varied by region and by what was available. In the heavily forested areas of the upper Midwest and the Appalachians, the most effective chinking was a layered system. The first layer was a mechanical filler. Wood chips, split bark strips, or dried moss pressed tightly into the gap to create a physical barrier and a base for the next layer. The second layer was a compound made from clay soil mixed with animal hair, typically horsehair or deer hair, and sometimes dried grass or cattail fluff. The hair did something specific. It gave the clay matrix tensile strength, preventing it from cracking as it dried and as the logs expanded and contracted with temperature change. The third layer, applied over the top when available, was a lime-based plaster or a pine pitch seal that waterproofed the compound and prevented moisture from getting behind the chinking and freezing it out from the inside. This three-layer system had been independently developed across multiple continents. Vernacular builder and material scientist Tuomi Forest documented similar layered chinking systems in Finnish, Norwegian, and Russian log-building traditions, all of which had arrived at the same structural logic through centuries of cold-weather trial and error. The clay hair compound in particular was so effective that modern builders attempting to restore historic log structures frequently find it still intact and still functional after more than a century. But the chinking was only the beginning. The floor was the second great battlefield. Cold air is dense. It sinks. It pools along the floor surface. In a modern home, this is managed with subfloor insulation and sealed vapor barriers. In a frontier cabin, it was managed with something simpler and considerably more effective than people give it credit for. The first tool was the floor itself. A properly built frontier cabin did not have a plank floor nailed directly to the ground. It had a raised floor, logs or heavy planks set on top of sill logs that themselves rested on stone or hardwood footings, with an air gap between the floor surface and the ground below. That air gap, when properly sealed around the perimeter with packed earth or stone, became a dead air space. Dead air does not conduct heat, it insulates. The ground beneath the cabin, which sat at a relatively stable temperature of around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even in brutal winters, became a thermal buffer. The floor above it was never as cold as the air outside. On top of that floor, frontier families laid heavy animal hides, bear fur, buffalo robes, elk hide. Not for decoration, not for comfort. For the same reason modern sleeping bags use downfill. Trapped air pockets within the fur structure created a layer of insulated dead air directly between the foot and the cold floor surface. A person standing on a buffalo robe on a negative 40-degree night was not standing on a cold surface. They were standing on a thermal barrier with an R value that researchers at the University of Alberta, studying traditional indigenous insulation methods, estimated at comparable to modern fiberglass bats. The walls were next, and this is where the most misunderstood technique of all comes in. The interior walls of a frontier cabin were almost never left as bare logs. They were lined. The material used depended entirely on what was available and what the builder understood about heat transfer. In the wealthiest frontier homes, the lining was boards, a second interior wall of split planks or whipsawed lumber packed with dried moss or cattail fluff between the log wall and the board wall. In more modest cabins, the lining was sewn fabric, flour sacks, grain bags, heavy wool cloth, stretched and nailed to the interior log surface, with dried grass, moss, or animal fur stuffed loosely behind it. In the most basic but still effective version, the walls were simply hung with heavy blankets or hides that created a dead air layer between the cold log surface and the living space. What all of these systems shared was a single principle that modern building science has now formalized under the term thermal envelope management. You do not have to make the wall perfectly insulating. You only have to prevent cold air from moving through it. A still air layer, even a thin one, is an insulator. A moving air layer is not. The liner created stillness. The stillness created warmth. The roof was the final frontier, literally and thermally. Heat rises. In a poorly built cabin, every BTU the fire produced rose straight to the ceiling and leaked out through the roof and the chimney gaps. Frontier builders understood this intuitively. The solution was to make the loft useful. A cabin with a sleeping loft above the main living space was not just a space-saving measure. The loft acted as a thermal buffer zone. Warm air rising from the fire below filled the loft space and insulated the roof from beneath. The family sleeping in the loft slept in the warmest air in the cabin. The cold air from outside had to push down through the warm loft air before it could reach the living space below. It rarely made it all the way. The loft was often filled additionally with stored goods, bags of grain, dried goods, equipment, which added thermal mass. Thermal mass absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. A loft packed with grain sacks did not warm up as fast as an empty room, but it also did not cool down as fast. It became a slow-release heat reservoir that helped moderate the temperature swings between the roaring fire of evening and the dying coals of early morning. Building scientist and historic preservation researcher John Leake, who has spent decades studying the thermal performance of historic American structures, noted in his documentation of New England and Appalachian vernacular buildings that the loft as thermal buffer pattern appeared consistently across structures built by builders with no formal education and no contact with each other. It was not taught in any school. It was discovered independently by people who were cold enough that they had no choice but to figure it out. And figure it out they did. The chimney itself was part of the system. A properly built frontier fireplace was not designed to be a large open mouth venting heat directly to the outside. It was designed with a specific geometry, a throat, a smoke shelf, a damper opening that created a draft column of rising warm air that carried smoke up and out while pulling cold air in at the bottom of the firebox rather than from the room. The Rumford fireplace, designed by physicist and inventor Benjamin Thompson, Count Rumford, in the 1790s, was the formal codification of what frontier builders had been doing by instinct for generations. Its shallow firebox, angled sides, and narrow throat radiated more heat into the room and drew less cold air from the living space than any previous design. Thomas Jefferson installed 4 of them at Monticello. Hundreds of frontier builders had already built something close to the same design, by feel and by iteration, without ever reading a word Thompson wrote. The door was sealed with a buffalo hide or heavy wool curtain hung on the inside. The window gaps, where windows existed at all, were covered in winter with greased animal membrane, which was translucent enough to let in a small amount of light and dense enough to block nearly all wind penetration. In the hardest winters, snow was banked up against the exterior walls deliberately. Snow is an extraordinary insulator. The Inuit understood this and built entire structures from it. Frontier builders understood it too. Banked snow against the lower half of a cabin wall added an R value that cut through wall heat loss dramatically. What emerges from all of this is not a portrait of people barely surviving through brute endurance. It is a portrait of applied physics developed without instruments, without formal education, without anything except observation, iteration, and the clear and immediate feedback of survival. They did not have R values, they had results. A cabin that stayed warm through the night with a single load of wood was a successful cabin. One that required constant feeding of the fire through the night was a failed design, and the builder knew it and changed it. The knowledge worked, the methods were sound. And then the era of cheap manufactured housing arrived, and the men who knew how to bank snow against the wall and stuff cattail fluff between boards were told that their methods were primitive, that the new way was better, that the factory-made house with its standard framing and its commercially rated insulation was an improvement on what they had spent generations learning to build. In some ways, it was. In other ways, the loss was real. Because the -40-degree night is still -40 degrees, the physics has not changed. The cold air still sinks, the gaps still leak, the heat still rises. And a man who understood those facts well enough to stay warm through the winter without any of the infrastructure that makes modern heating possible, understood something about the relationship between a human being and the physical world that is not written down anywhere most people would think to look. The frontier cabin is still out there. Some of them are still standing. If you find one, a real one, not a replica, and you put your hand against the interior wall in February, you will feel something that surprises you. It will be warm. Not because the materials were magical, because the man who built it understood exactly where the cold was coming from, and he did not leave a single gap for it to get through.